Good morning, good evening, or good night, whichever one it is for you, whichever one it is. I'm very glad you're here to join me for this week's video because today I thought I would share with you some classics that are, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, criminally underrated. Some of these I have never heard anyone talk about, and just to me, these are masterpieces. These are such incredible books, and I wish more people would access them and be able to appreciate these works. And so I thought I would compile a little list and share it with you. And so without further ado, let us get right in by talking about, actually, this is one of my favorites on this list, which is kind of cool to start out with it. This is The Birds by, I practice pronouncing this name, Tarjei Vesaas. I'm probably butchering that name completely, but it's a Norwegian author. He actually won the Nobel Prize of Literature, and he is such an incredible author. He writes these really quiet works, and this specifically is just a masterpiece of writing. This book follows Mattis, who's mentally challenged or developmentally challenged. I'm not quite sure how to properly categorize him, but he's a grown man who feels more like a little boy. He's very naive, very untouched by the world, and he lives very much in his own little world. And he lives alone in a little cottage, in a little house near a lake in a very tiny town in Norway with his sister Hege. It's about their daily life together. Mattis is the one we follow. He is such a precious character to follow because he just sees the world in such a special way. And again, it feels like you're reading about a little boy, but it's a man, it's a grown man. And he has this incredible love for the nature around him, for animals specifically. He becomes really fascinated with these birds that migrate over their house, and he feels this really strong connection to them. There's one passage pertaining to those birds that broke my heart. It really made me cry. This story is such a quiet one, but it's gonna break your heart. You want just the best for this man because he's so innocent at the same time. You also follow his sister Hege because she is the only one Mattis, the main character, has. She is sort of put in this position where she has to take care of him, and she makes a lot of sacrifices for him. That makes for a very interesting dynamic. They love each other so much, and it's so obvious, but again, it's a complicated story. It's complex, and it's so incredibly well done. It astonishes me what Vesaas was able to do here. I know The Ice Palace by him is really popular, or at least it's getting more popular, but I think this one is better. I think you'll love it. It's so good. Next up, we have Saika Vika by Halldór Laxness, one of my favorite authors. And this is actually one of my favorite books by him because Laxness does this thing really well where he takes a main character and he tells you their life story through the voice of that main character. And so depending on who you're following, the story will take on a very distinct voice. This follows Saika Vika, who's a young woman, or at the beginning of the story, she's a really young girl arriving in a small town in Iceland with her mom. One thing that Laxness does so well is portray the intimate and unique climate of a small town that is so isolated from anything else. They are isolated from the mainland. There is a little microcosm that's built in this small town. Poverty is a huge deal here. Laxness gave a voice to these small towns who were economically challenged, who were very much victims of the greater economic situation in Iceland. And Saika Vika is one of the most unforgettable main characters I have ever read about. She is such a headstrong and stubborn character, and she experiences a lot of grief and a lot of really horrific situations. She refuses to be put down by her circumstances, and she's so resilient, and she never really loses her own character. It's such a complex story. The personal relationships in here, the relationships Saika Vika creates, and just the kind of life she builds for herself, the journey of her just trying to make a life for herself as a woman, a very independent and non-traditional woman. In Iceland, in this really small town with this really unique climate, it's just such a great story. It's beautifully written. There's so many poetic lines. Laxness had a true connection to the nature he lived among, and just he makes you feel that. Maybe pick up Saika Vika. I don't think you'd regret it. Next up, we have one I actually read quite recently. This is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I don't think this is as unpopular as the other ones, but still I thought I'd mention it because this is the story of Newland Archer, who at the beginning of our story is engaged to a young woman. They are both part of New York high society, the old nobility of New York, very much the traditional kind of man. He's the ideal man. He's engaged to the ideal female of New York high society. They are very much just the picture perfect couple. This story basically just uses these characters to expose the emptiness and the hypocrisy of New York life, specifically the life of the rich people of New York at the time, because we are at the turn of the century, things are getting more modern, but specifically this climate of the nobility is still very much in the past. They are still living extremely traditional lives. There is no such thing as individuality or personality or any kind of unique characterization among these people. They are all empty shells because that is all this kind of life will allow them to be. That is made even more clear by the arrival of a woman called Ellen Olenska, who sort of functions as the antithesis of the woman Archer is engaged to, because Ellen is a very much non-traditional woman. She lives a non-traditional life. She's separated from her husband. She's trying to get a divorce from him. She is also rich, but she is very much an outsider here, and she challenges all of these preconceived notions of the nobility. Ellen is such a cool character, and she feels incredibly modern. Archer is now sort of put in this situation where he's conflicted between the high society he lives in and the attraction he feels to this woman, to Ellen Olenska. The conflict that is created when you are put in a situation where you have to decide if you're going to follow the life that is expected of you to lead, or if you're gonna follow your heart. That in itself is such a cool premise, but also the main character makes this even more complex, because on the one hand, Archer loves to critique high society's ideals, but on the other hand, as a rich man, he profits from these ideals constantly. This is the kind of story where you just know that Edith Wharton planned this entire thing to the T. Everything is intentional. The ending really makes that so clear. It's also a critique of gender roles, of prejudice. It's enjoyable to read, which is a really interesting juxtaposition. Among the works of this kind that I've read, I think this is the best one, or at least among the very, very best ones. Maybe check it out. It's also really, really well written, by the way. We have another one I've read quite recently, which I just couldn't not mention here. This is The Diary of a Nobody by George Grossmith, or Grossmith, I'm still not sure how to pronounce his name. It's illustrated by his brother Whedon. This is the diary of a completely ordinary man living in the countryside of England. It is so funny. It is so quirky. It should be so boring, but it really is not. Nothing about this is boring. I did that in my wrap-up too, but I just think this is the best representation to how cool this book is. On the back it says, "Why should Mr. Pooter's diary not be immortalized in print? Merely because he is not a somebody." I think this is one of the most criminally underrated books. The illustrations are really cool and they just break up the story. It's so easy to read because these are really short entries. All of these characters start to feel really vivid because this feels like such an intimate insight into their day-to-day lives. And if you love history, you're gonna be absolutely crazy about this book. But also just if you love funny things, that is The Diary of a Nobody. Highly recommend. Next up, we have Vlet by Charlotte Bronte. In my opinion, Charlotte's best work. This is the story of Lucy Snow, who travels to France to become a school teacher at a girls' boarding school. She has had very many circumstances in her life that have been really difficult. She's one of those people who just bad things keep happening to her. She is such an incredible and unforgettable main character because she has had so much sadness in her life and so much unfairness, but she does not really have the opportunity to wallow in her own sorrow because she has to survive. She has to take care of herself. She is an incredibly fierce, unique character. She is very removed from her own situation, from her own feelings, and so the entire story sort of takes on that lens. You have to really read between the lines to realize just how sad her life is and just how sad she is as a character and how lonely. Her life is really, really lonely. It's beautifully written. Charlotte Bronte is an incredible writer. It also also talks a lot about religion because Lucy is Protestant. Very interesting religious criticism. It does all of the things Jane Eyre does, but in my opinion, much better. Also, it's said to be Charlotte's most autobiographical work because a lot of her own experience went into inspiring this book. I think you can feel that because this feels so vivid. Give this book a shot. It's so worth it. I promise you it is. Another really great one is A Sportsman's Notebook by Ivan Turgenev. Turgenev is one of the most underrated Russian classic authors, in my opinion. This is snapshots of what basically feels like him experiencing the very ordinary life of peasants at the time. He basically takes this travel through the Russian countryside and he meets all of these people. He experiences all of these cool things. It's a love letter to the Russian countryside, to the Russian peasants. And Turgenev does something really well that not very many Russian classic authors do. He represents ordinary peasant life in such a realistic way. At the same time, he writes so beautifully. Something that makes this book more layered is Turgenev wrote this as he was in exile from Russia, which makes it even more fascinating because there is no bitterness here. There is no hate. The way Turgenev went about advocating for the peasants of Russia here is the best way he could have possibly done it. That is A Sportsman's Notebook by Turgenev. Another Russian classic, which I just have to mention here, is Notes from a Dead House by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This book is inspired by a real-life occurrence that happened in Dostoevsky's life where when he was, I think, 23, I'm pretty sure, he was arrested and sentenced to death for political activities. He was led to the site of execution and he had been pardoned by the Tsar, but he hadn't been told he'd been pardoned, so they led him and his fellow inmates to the place where they were gonna be executed. And at the last moment, he was told he'd been pardoned. He was sure he was about to die. And you can tell from his work before and after that really shaped him so much, that disillusioned him so much more. It changed him fundamentally, and it changed the way he wrote from that point onward. And he was pardoned, but he was sentenced to 4 years in a Russian prison. This is inspired by that prison sentence. He wrote down all of his experiences on little note papers and he kept them. It's such a fascinating psychological study into the microcosm that is created in this prison, where social rules that you are used to from the outside do not apply. There's even vocabulary that is created, an entirely own way of speaking. In many ways, this is the extreme of society because you are in a place where someone might have murdered dozens of children, whereas another person might have just distributed a political flyer that was seen as offensive. All of these varying types of criminals, all in the same place, in these really close quarters. The observation of what makes life livable. The fact that these prisoners, one thing that makes them survive is hard labor, but also the insight that hard labor needs to have a purpose, whereas something that is entirely purposeless will literally drive you crazy. It's such a valuable insight because so much of it is so unexpected. It's so philosophically, psychologically deep. It's beautifully written. Dostoevsky's just a genius. I don't know what else to say. I don't think that comes as a surprise. One of his best works, in my opinion, that was Notes from a Dead House. Next up, we have a Japanese classic. This is Dandelions by Yasunari Kawabata. I really love Kawabata's writing because he writes such mundane daily life occurrences of Japanese life. He is very much the quintessential Japanese writer. His writing is overly simplistic, but deceivingly so, because there is so much symbolism. In my opinion, he is one of the more difficult Japanese writers because you really have to learn to look for the symbolism. And the more you know about Japanese culture, the more you're gonna understand the depth that Kawabata's writing goes to. Dandelions, in my opinion, is maybe his best, or at least one of his very best works, and it's one I hear talked about very rarely, so I thought I'd mention it because it is so great. The premise alone. We follow a woman. She is being taken to a psychiatric hospital by her boyfriend and her mother, and the entire book is just the conversation that takes place between the mother and the boyfriend after they have just left her in that hospital, talking about her life and what that life sort of has caused and where her illness might have come from. Because we find out that this main character, this woman, has basically become face blind, but very selectively. It's so highly symbolic, and it's psychologically so insanely intriguing, and it's such a unique concept. I have never read anything like this before. I highly, highly, highly recommend Dandelions, but not Relaxness, because I just could not keep it to just one. This is The Adams Station, which follows a woman, a young woman, who comes from the north of Iceland to move to the south of Iceland to work for the family of a politician there. Being thrust into this life of political oppositions, political warfare almost, this is the time where America is trying to buy land in Iceland to build a NATO airbase. Many people in Iceland are not happy with that, and so that creates a lot of conflict. But in my opinion, this is more just the story of this woman trying to find a place in life. She is very much like Saika Vika in a lot of ways, because she is also very stubborn, very unique. She refuses to follow the traditional mold of what a woman at the time was supposed to be and do. That creates a lot of difficulty and conflict for her. She does not let that get in her way. Great social commentary, specifically about gender roles. You also get to see the difficulty of being a poor woman, because that is even more of a difficult situation. For being so short, this packs such a punch because there are so many things involved here. Flaxness is a poet at heart. He loves poetry. He loves writing about landscapes and people in the most rich and beautiful prose. Overall, it's such a masterpiece. It's so good, and it's much shorter than Saika Vika. So if you are maybe a bit intimidated by the length of that one, maybe you want to pick up this one because it's equally as good. It's maybe a little less in depth and a little less emotionally moving, therefore, because you have less time to be invested in these characters. But it contains most of what Saika Vika does, and it does it very well too. So The Adams Station might be an alternative for you. Then this is just an excuse for me to talk about my favorite authors again, because I don't do that enough already. This is The Road Through the Wall by Shirley Jackson, which is a very unique kind of Shirley Jackson work, because this is about the sinister aspects of human life, but that is very understated here, because at its core, this is just the story of one road in America and the people who live on that road. It feels suffocating in a way, because everyone knows everyone. Everyone is judging everyone. People are really nice up front, but really mean behind each other's backs. The children bully each other, but they also play with each other. There isn't much scariness here, except for just the suffocation of living on that road. I would never want to live on a road like this. And then at the end, you suddenly know that this is in fact a Shirley Jackson, and it does make sense, because it gets really, really dark all of a sudden. It's so cool, and I really liked it so much, and I think it is quite an underrated story by Shirley Jackson. I don't hear that talked about as often. So that was The Road Through the Wall. Okay, this is becoming a problem because this is another favorite author. But again, I will never not take the opportunity to talk about Yukio Mishima. This is The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, which is one of my favorite Mishimas. The main character of this book witnesses a very disturbing thing his mother does when he's still very young, and it causes him to develop a stutter, and so he becomes really alienated. He is bullied severely, and he is very, very lonely. That all changes when he becomes an acolyte at this temple in Kyoto, and he develops this really fanatic obsession with this temple. It's his ideal of beauty and goodness and grace, and this temple becomes his religion, but in a very disturbing way. This is the quintessential kind of Mishima combination of religious fanaticism, obsession, beauty, violence, beautiful writing to juxtapose that. It is written in a way that is so suspenseful that you just need to know what happens next. Such a complex story, and Mishima is just so uniquely brilliant. So yeah, that is The Temple of the Golden Pavilion. Next up, we have Howard's End by E.M. Forster. Forster is, of course, not an underrated author, but I think this book should be talked about more because it's my favorite by him. This is the story of two sisters who grow up in England at the turn of the century, and therefore they embody the kind of ideal of a new woman. But one of them is much more involved in the new way of thinking than the other. The other has more traditional values. And so within these sisters, there is created this conflict of the new kind of ideal and the old way of living. There's a constant here, which is this house in the countryside called Howard's End, where one of the sisters goes to at the beginning of the story, and she falls in love with that house. And in many ways, that house becomes a huge symbol here, which I won't get into because that's so fun to realize for yourself, but that house stays consistent throughout. And it stays a sort of marker, like a point of orientation almost. And it's so fascinating because this house is a kind of main character as well. There are so many complicated family dynamics here, also marriage dynamic, the conflict that is created from this change of traditional to modern. Overall, I think Howard's End is just a really good book. It's also really well written. Self-Portraits by Osamu Dazai. Surprise, surprise, another favorite of mine. Self-Portraits, along with No Longer Human, is my favorite by him. This is a collection of short stories, basically. Short stories that read incredibly autobiographical, and also short stories that feel like they are connected. You can read them separately, but they all feel almost like diary entries. The reason I recommend this so much is because I think this is the perfect representation of all of Dazai's abilities. For one, this is incredibly sad and heartbreaking at times. There is so much insight into mental illness and the difficulties of a person not really feeling like a person, not really knowing who they are, not really wanting to be on this earth, but sort of being there anyway and trying to make the best of it, but also really not trying at all. But there's also so many funny things here. There's a story about dogs specifically, which I just find so hilarious. I smile just thinking about it. And it's the perfect combination of everything. It's also really well written. Dazai is an incredible writer. And I think it's so easy to read just because of the format and the way it's written. Because there's so much variety, it never gets boring. A Dazai to me never gets boring, but this specifically never could. That is Self-Portraits by Osamu Dazai. Lastly, we have one I don't think I've ever talked about because this is one of those books that are so special to me, I don't really know how to do them justice. This is The Letters of Vincent van Gogh. This literally changed my life. I do not know how to put my feelings about this book into words. It's in my top maybe 3 books of all time. This is so special to me. This is a very comprehensive collection of most of the letters Vincent van Gogh wrote, predominantly to his brother Theo, but also to friends and other family members. These are at once the documentations of his journey of teaching himself how to paint and of becoming an artist, but also his struggles with that, with the fact that he was never actually successful as an artist during his lifetime, the tragedy of this man's life, the loneliness of his life. His whole thing was just trying to be of use to this world, to find a place where he would be of use, or a thing or a means for him to be of use to people. It's also an account of his increasing struggles with illness, with mental and physical illness. Such a multifaceted and such an intimate insight into this man's life. It is the single most intimate thing I have ever read. You know how sometimes you can read autobiographical things, be that letters or diary entries that feel like they were written to be viewed by someone later, like with that thought in mind of having to represent yourself a certain way. I don't think this is the case here because he does not portray himself as perfect. There are many points in this story where he comes across as very difficult and very complex. Van Gogh was an incredibly difficult kind of person, but he himself had the most difficulties with himself. And so, especially if you've ever struggled with your own mental health, maybe, or just with your circumstances, I think this is the single most relatable story. And it's so comforting because there is so much wisdom here. He was such a deep thinker. This is, in my opinion, one of the best works of philosophy ever. Of course, to me, this is even more special because Van Gogh is why I discovered my love for art. And my love for art makes me love this so much more. Art became his religion. He viewed life through the lens of art. This man was obsession defined, beautifully written. It's the most intimate insight you will ever have into a historic personality, in my opinion. It's a treasure trove of just life advice and comfort. It's also interspersed with sketches because he always sent home pictures of his sketches and of his progress and accounts of that. So these letters include all of his sketches where he was basically showing Theo what he was doing at the time, and you see his progress. Not just in how he writes about it, but in the actual sketches that are in here. An incredible book, and one I think many, many more people should appreciate. I think this is the kind of thing that has a potential to be life-changing. Yeah. That is the letters of Vincent van Gogh. And I think this is where I'm going to end this video because nothing will ever top this book. And so it's a fitting place to stop. I hope you found some recommendations. Let me know if you've known of any of them. Maybe you've already read some. Maybe you have some more recommendations. I would always be happy. I love discovering new little gems that I've maybe never heard about. Maybe let me know if you have any. I hope you have a really nice day. If you're not having a nice day, that is fine too. I'm thinking about you either way, and I am grateful you were here. I am already looking forward to seeing you again next week, and until then I will see you very soon. Bye bye.